Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we come together to learn more about Java and Azure and how to build Spring Boot microservices. My name is Hussam Mohsine. I'm the program manager for Microsoft Reactor Abu Dhabi. Microsoft Reactors are hubs for founders and developers to meet, learn, and connect to local peers, as well as industry-leading ideas and technology from Microsoft, partners, and the open source community. It's also home to the Microsoft for Startups program, with a diverse mix of hands-on workshops, expert panels, and community events. There is something for everyone. Check out our calendar of events on meetup.com and join our coming sessions. Our speaker today is Rory Preddy. Rory is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. His focus for the last few years has been on research, development, with a focus on cloud research, consulting, and training. His work in research allowed him unparalleled insight into industry movements, trends, and news. Rory heads up the Middle East and Africa accessibility pillar for Microsoft, speaking and inspiring on how to empower everyone in every organization to achieve more. Feel free to ask questions during the session. We will have regular stops to answer these questions. And also feel free to tweet about the session and tag us on Reactor Abu Dhabi, that's the hashtag, and the Twitter handle is MSFT Reactor. Make sure you adjust also the playback settings to select the highest quality for the best experience during the session, since we will be coding and using different tools. With all that said, I hand over the mic to our speaker to start the session.
Hey everyone, I'm coming from sunny South Africa. Right now, blue skies from Johannesburg. And thank you, Hassan, for the introduction. And I've been a Java developer for 20 years now, based out of Microsoft South Africa, and a Spring developer since 2003. And this was a great session to introduce you both to the Java capabilities of Azure, but also the Spring capabilities of Azure. And we're going to be doing some demos and some PowerPoint, and let's break into it now. So I'm going to start the slideshow, and I'm going to be using my little Lenovo pen here to actually annotate. So if you can follow, you'll see that I'll annotate here with this here, and then we'll go through the slides together. So the topic is Java on Azure, building Spring Boot microservices. Wow, are we still talking about microservices? I thought that was just a fad that kind of faded in, but it's not. We're actually revisiting them, and we're actually calling them just services. And I think that word there kind of fell away. We're just calling them Spring Boot services. You can follow me on Twitter. I do about 50% memes and funny programmer-related humor, and then another 50% Azure updates. Always an interesting time on my Twitter handle. So let's start. What are we going to talk about in the agenda? So one, I'm going to show you a little bit brief introduction on Java on Azure. Then we're going to talk about microservices, the history behind it, and how people tackle them. We're going to look at the Spring framework and how we can actually mitigate that the microservices headache with certain technology in Spring. And then we're going to look at Azure Spring Cloud, a new development that Azure and Microsoft has done in conjunction with Pivotal, one of our core partners. And we're going to look at how you can actually use the Spring framework and Spring Cloud to build microservices. So we have partners that have assisted us in the development of Azure. Some of those being, like I mentioned before, Pivotal, Oracle, who actually owns Java. Then we have Azure Systems, which will go through exactly how you can actually use their tools and technologies. We got Red Hat with the incredibly powerful OpenShift. We've just released OpenShift 4. I can't type. OpenShift 4 on Azure. We've got Intel for our hardware, SAP on Azure, incredibly popular tools and technologies, and then IBM WebSphere and WebSphere on Azure. We also use Java heavily. And I know this is not, the day that we said, back in the day in the 2000s that we said open source is communism, but we are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, open source contributors in the world. And ironically, actually, we use more Linux on Azure than we do Windows. And some of our competitors actually use more Windows than we do. And we love Java. We're a contributing member to the Java community process and the Open JDK. Now in Azure, we have all of these tools and technologies that use Java, Azure Databricks, HD Insights, Spring Cloud, and more. LinkedIn, hundreds of Java microservices. I don't know if you know Dropwizard, 60 open Java source projects on GitHub. Minecraft, well, everyone knows Minecraft. Minecraft actually is built in Java. Yammer, Java on the back end, and also uses Dropwizard. SQL Server, Java now embedded out of the box. And we've got poly-based data visualizations with big data clusters, interop with Spark Hadoop connectors, and then Android. So we have Azure mobile platforms, and then thousands of developers are building Android applications at Microsoft. The new Surface Phone based on Android OS. We also have
Sorry, just a quick one. Sorry to interrupt. I want you to push the slides so that I can add them to the stream.
Oh, you're not adding them? Discord. I don't understand why you. Okay, hold on 1 second. It stopped actually for some reason. Sorry. There we go. Perfect. And let's start again. Okay, so we've gone through Microsoft uses Java heavily. You can start off following me at Rory Preddy. And we also use in Azure Services portfolio a lot of different tech tools and technologies that allow you to actually use Java. So we have App Services, Zulu JDK, Tomcat, Wildflower, Spring, CosmoDB, Redis. We also have SQL Server that interacts with Java, Postgres, MySQL, and then we have Azure Monitor and Azure DevOps that have Java capabilities. And we allow you to also use the SDK to look at storage of blob storage, use Key Vault, Active Directory, and then we have integration with Service Bus, Event Hub, and Event Grid. So our SDKs also, you can use data. We've just released also the R2 JDBC SQL drivers for SQL Server, which means that you can actually do reactive SQL Server engagement. Great talk if I get invited here again to do SQL Server. And then we have engagement with security, storage, cache, and then messaging. Spring on Azure. So Spring, we have a heavy investment with Pivotal on that. And we've broken it up into, and we'll go through later, Spring Cloud, Spring Data. So we have all of these databases that we cater for that. Spring Security, Spring Resourcing, Messaging, Micrometer, Cache, and R2 JDBC. The marketplace, you can also get a lot of these third-party and partner-based tooling. We've been through some of them. And then finally, also Azure Systems. So Azure is the main partner that we actually host our JDK tools on. So you can see here, we have a preview of JDK 13 coming on Azure. And Azure really has free support for all Java LTS versions available for environments. We support all of those with JDK on Azure, Azure Stack, DevOps Server, and SQL Server. And also you get the upstream pushes to OpenJDK by Azure Systems. Java and Azure, so let's just recap. So free commercial support for Java by the Azure Zulu Enterprise OpenJDK. First-class Java support for all of these Spring Cloud app services, functions, Azure integration, dev spaces, DevOps, so many different things. First-class Java tooling support. We created and we really brought to the industry the language service support that everyone is currently using for Java language service support. Even Eclipse has adopted that, and that's integrated into Visual Studio Code, the #1 code editor right now use that. And we also have really good integration with IntelliJ, which I'll be demoing a little bit later. So let's start off with a misconception. Who here thinks that serverless is actually microservices? And I think this is a big, it's kind of like a war waging right now, because everyone's saying, no, serverless is the new microservices. But microservices kind of is more than just micro. So if you take away the micro, so then is serverless services? And then it starts to make a lot more sense though, because what is a service? A service is just an individual component that does a certain purpose. But services also require butlers. So let's call this here a butler. And the butler really handles all of the mundane tasks that manage the serverless life cycles to stop you from having to get into poor anti-patterns for microservice. Now we actually have, let's just go here. I want to show you a nice little portal. I'm going over here. So we have something called a architecture Azure portal. And in the architecture Azure portal, no, not that. Architecture center here. That went there again. There we go. So in the architecture center, you can browse Azure architectures. And the reason I want to show you this is that you can actually go here and look for patterns. And the minute that you do that, application design, patterns designing for the cloud, you'll notice something, that services are incredibly difficult to manage when it comes to all of these catalogs of patterns. We have the ambassador pattern, anti-corruption layer, asynchronous bulkhead, choreography, circuit breaker, all of these different things. And these are all managed, these are all mechanisms to help you manage your services. So how can then, if serverless equal services? And the truth is that serverless itself is a service. And if we start to look at serverless just as a service, we realize it can't actually handle all of the patterns that we require. And now we on Azure use Azure Functions as our primary serverless function. You can use events, write code for it, and then you have the outputs. But Java and Azure goes one step further. Now remember those patterns here. So in Java and Azure, we support the ability to take the monolith and break it up into microservices or your serverless architecture. So we'll take the monolith, which is your standard kind of massive Uber jar, and then we'll containerize that for you, or give you the option to containerize it. Then we'll have new microservices for it in one of the many different mechanisms and tools and technologies. We'll take those parts of the monolith and that will allow you to extract it, define it, and clearly isolate them. And then finally, we'll allow you to identify and create your microservices or by your serverless application hosted inside Java on Azure. And we do that also by teaching and identifying all the different architectures and the basic architectures you can do with microservices. So we have our client, and our client will call an API gateway. And the API gateway that would then abstract from services or serverless. And then each one of those could actually form part of a cluster or a scaling group. And then that is in your wireless network. This could be integrated with DevOps. And then afterwards here, a very important component is the management and orchestration of those services, the lifecycle management of the actual services. We use Spring to do that on Java on Azure predominantly. You can see here, this is a study by SNYK.io, and it says that Spring Boot, Spring MVC contains 40% of the share of application developer frameworks. We can see here we also have JSF, Struts, GWT, Varden, Clay, Grails. My colleague works on JHipster. Shout out to Julian, Dropwizard, Wicket, and other. And we also partner with Pivotal on Azure. So what we're here today to look at is to look at Spring-based microservices. because Spring is so highly popular, and because we understand that microservices require more of those management services, and they're not only individual serverless services, we want to look at what can we do with Spring Boot, and then also what can we do with Spring Cloud. And we've got some mottos here that really sum it up. So Spring Boot, build anything, and Spring Cloud, coordinate anything. And we're starting to look at also microservices. When we think about coordination, is really what we want to do of management. And common challenges with Spring Boot that a lot of people find is there's a high effort required to manage cloud infrastructure for Spring Boot applications. The application lifecycle is difficult to manage and painful to troubleshoot application issues. So how do you get started with Spring Boot? Just a quick little demo. And the easiest way that I find that you can actually get started with Spring Boot is via DevOps. I'm going to show you quickly how to do that with the Spring Boot Starter. So I've got here the Azure portal, create DevOps Starter. We're going to create a very brief thing. We'll come back to it in Q&A. I'm going to create a Spring Boot Starter on DevOps, and I'm going to go Java, next, Spring, next, Linux web app. You could use Kubernetes or even containers, next. I'm going to call this here Spring Boot Starter RPZA. I've created an organization and a DevOps organization before. I'm going to use my Visual Studio subscription here, which allows you to have $150 on enterprise. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. The web app name and then location, South Central US, and I'm going to leave the pricing tier done, and then done. That's how you actually create a full CI/CD. We'll come back to that later, and that's all you need to do to actually create a Spring Boot Starter on Azure. But what you'll notice here is that we didn't create a microservice. We just created one service, and that's really the motto that I covered on the previous slide, which is build anything. We're going to be given the option to build anything, but we want coordinate anything. So here you have your app customers, IoT, mobile, and browser. And like we saw before, they hit an API gateway. And the minute they hit that API gateway, that's part of the Spring Cloud components. And the Spring Cloud components also allow you to put a breaker dashboard there, a config dashboard, and they use load balancing to actually push it to your microservices in your Spring Cloud apps. And then we've got our Spring Cloud components, our service registry, our distributed tracing, and then our message broker and databases connect into that. All the time also using Hystrix and also other technologies made popular by Netflix, Zool. Now, the interesting thing about Netflix and the reason why a lot of these technologies focus on, so Netflix motto is stability under every cost. So if you have Netflix, you'll notice that they've got like a dashboard there. And even if there is some streaming issues with Netflix, you'll know that the dashboard goes from high definition to low definition to text. And it allows you to actually use all of these technologies, Hystrix and Zool, inside Spring to leverage off that and to manage the application lifecycle. So the second demo we're going to do, we'll come back to that DevOps one now, is that we're going to go through the Azure Sample Spring Cloud. So you can go to github.com, Azure Samples, Azure Spring Cloud, and in it that we have something called the Piggy metrics. I'll draw a pig here. The Piggy metrics, yeah, that's about as best I can do as a pig. And it's a little savings app there that allows you to manage some savings. And it's actually uses quite a few components. So we've got a client, which is the Chrome browser. We're going to hit an API gateway. We have a statistics service, which uses Ribbon, Hystrix, and Zool to manage itself. Then we have an account service, a notification service. We have a config service that manages all of these to make sure that they get their config, an authorization service linked to authorization and authentication. And then we have service discovery that also ties back into the gateway. And all of this actually is going to be hosted in Spring Cloud. So first I'm going to show you the actual application. And this is our little Piggy metrics. So we're going to create a new account here, and we'll call this React. And we'll give it, I want to register there. I'll go back one step. Okay, registered. And then I want to actually add some income there. So for my income, for my little piggy application, I want to do $200, and I'm going to call that income. The expenses there, I'm going to do 100, and I'm going to call that expenses. And then I'm going to do accumulation account, monthly capitalization, and then save it. It's going to give me a nice dashboard, and this is in Farmleaf using JavaScript. And underneath all of this, all of the authentication, authorization, all of that is actually being run on Azure on Spring Cloud. Yeah, I know. But I want to see, wait a second, it took a little bit long to log in. What is exactly going wrong? Wouldn't it be nice to actually have distributed tracing and monitoring around that? So to do that also, I want to show you the actual application on Azure. So I've got the application here. And I've got the, that's my portal, and I've got the Spring Metrics RPZA application here. And you can see here, I've got the portal, it's an Azure Spring Cloud, and you get all of the normal settings here. And then I've also got my apps, my config server and my deployment. So when I go into my apps here, I've only deployed the account service, the authorization service, and the gateway. I haven't actually done the monitoring service. And if I go into each one of these here, so if I go into the account service here, it'll give me also how many instances I've created in my cluster, one instance, and I can stop and start it. Then it'll also give me the option to scale, set my configuration, service bindings. And then I've got my authorization service and my gateway. Now, my gateway is what the URL that we hit originally for the Piggy metrics, and the gateway is the kind of the entry to your application that you have here. And I'm also interested in two other applications that I see here, Hello World. Now, I created these because I wanted to show you something. I've got Hello World, and in Hello World here, this is the first instance of Hello World. You'll see there that it's giving one CPU and one gigabyte of memory. I've got my little application here. I can click on it, I can go into it and view it, and it just says hello, and I've just left the name as default. But I also have another application here on Azure called Hello World 11 that I created recently, and Hello World 11 actually runs Java 11. Wait, Rory, what are you telling me? That this thing can actually run Java 9 and 11 at the same time? Yes, it can actually, because, and we'll do that, and we'll do Rory. Because what we're seeing here on Spring Cloud, so it says hello Rory, what we're seeing here on Spring Cloud is that each one of these actual apps here is individual microservices. We've got the account service, we've got the auth service, the gateway, the Hello World Java 11, and Hello World. And each one of these are microservices, and all of them kind of interact between them using the Spring services. And they are isolated and in their own boundaries. And you can actually see how each one of these is configured as a microservices. So this is IntelliJ here. So IntelliJ has a Spring Cloud toolkit here on the Azure toolkit. And you can see here on the Hello World Java 11, I've got all of my settings here. I've got Java 11, CPU 1. I've got the actual Hello World one. I've got Java 8. And then I have my account services and my gateway services. And I can right click on there and go show properties. You'll see the Java 8. And I can also see it's part of the resource groups, the app name, the endpoints, and I can disable and enable the endpoints. And then I've got my account service here, which is the actual crux of it. If I go into the code for the actual account service, let's open that project up, open recent, and I want to go Piggy metrics. So the account service here, and this is the standard Piggy metrics that Spring Cloud uses. This isn't anything actually that we created ourselves at Microsoft. We're using the standard reference implementation. And the source here, we've got the client, the config, the controller, the domain repository and service. We also have the application.yaml. And importantly here, we actually set the application.yaml and to allow for Spring and Zipkin. And Zipkin is something that allows us to do distributed monitoring. So you've got the view of the application. Now we want to see, wait a second, we hit the auth services here. I want to see exactly why it took so long to actually register. So we have our monitoring here, and we set up Zipkin, and we've got something called distributed tracing. So I want to find the slowest microservice there that in the application. So I can go into my view application map. And what you'll notice here, this is just opening, is that I get a full application map. I'll do it like that, of all my services. Let's zoom in here. Let's put in, yeah, so let's make it there. All my services, my errors, and not in the last hour. I can actually go back all the way to the last 24 hours. And you'll see there that I have an error or a slowdown, and I can go into my instance here, view details, investigate the failure. So there was a failure here, slowest request by name, and this is the gateway account. So we can investigate the performance. Let's go investigate the performance. And it took me 200 milliseconds to get my OAuth token. That's pretty slow. So maybe I want to up on my cloud platforms. I want to give it another CPU maybe. So I've got my my actual settings here, and can drill into the samples. And it took 3 seconds actually to get the count there. But that might also be that it was the first time they hit it. And I can go back there and say, okay, cool. The gateway needs a little bit more oomph. I can get into that, and then I can scale it up dynamically. So I can go into my apps, into my gateway there. I can go into scale. Now you're wondering how many CPUs can I do? I can actually do up to 2 CPUs. In memory, I can go all the way to 8, and I can app instance count. I can even make the app instance count. So we can save that, and it'll go and do that dynamically for me. And that's something, that's application lifecycle. I don't have to manage that. I don't have to deploy that. And that's canary and blue-green deployments out of the box by Spring Cloud. So let's go back into our demo that we had here. So from current slide. So I showed you here what we did. So API gateway, and we scaled that for another 2 CPUs. We didn't have the statistic service, but you can actually put there, and you can put messages and statistics to a service bus. We did have monitoring that we had on all of these services, and that's built into Azure. We had the account service, notification service is the email service, config service there, which is, and I can actually show you that here. So the config service here can actually just get config server. I'm pulling the config service directly off a YAML file in the Azure samples pgmetrics config. And then finally, we have the auth service, which took a little bit longer than the gateway service, and then the service discovery. So diving in also, so let's go through here. So create the service app, and now how you do this you can either do this via the command line, but the easiest way to create the service app that I created, you can go to Azure Spring Cloud, you can create your subscription, the service name here, so your location, then you can create your app. You can call whatever you want. You can call it the Java 8 for the basic app there, or Java 11, the CPU, the memory, and the app instance count. Now you get to play around with, and all of these here, on all of this Spring Cloud, you get 32 gigabytes of memory, and you get 16 CPUs. You can have literally 16 CPUs and up to, I think it was about 10 different Spring apps. So that's 10 different Spring apps. So you could actually have about 60 to 70 microservices running in Spring. And this costs each one of these little Spring apps about $2 an hour to run all of that. And that's pretty economical when you think about the cost and what you get. So you can create the service also via the command line. And then you create the app, and you can also create the app, give it 2 CPUs. We created our auth service and our gateway service. You can see here just a demo of app instance count. Config the Spring service, and we saw that in the live demo. And an easy way to do all of this is the team and I have created the engineering team in Microsoft, a Maven plugin. And lets you do all of that via the portal. So one is you can git clone the Azure samples there. You can build that with Maven Clean, and you can, well, if you want to save some time, skip the test. And then you can go Maven, and you can run all of the config, and it'll create all of the config. I actually only specified in this example the gateway account service and the config service. And then you can actually go Maven Spring deploy, and it will just bring in your Azure account and deploy all of those services for you automatically. And that's pretty impressive and saves you a lot of that. So you can run this also in your DevOps, and you can have all of your Spring Cloud actually running in a DevOps CI/CD pipeline. We're going to look at a little bit of the DevOps stuff with Spring Cloud after this. So we've got that, and now the distributed tracing here. So we went through, you can investigate your failures, you can investigate your performance there, and we saw there that we mitigated with the gateway. So if you want to go back there with our performance failures, that we could actually go back into our apps here, and we should see here that the gateway already has, we added 2 here. So the gateway has, how many CPUs did we add? We added 2. Yay! We got 2 CPUs now. Didn't really need to monitor that. Didn't really even have downtime for that. Successfully scaled that. Also have something called search, which is the distributed application map search, which allows you to actually search for events and requests. So if you have a request and a customer says, listen, something didn't work, or my account was frozen, or something didn't, you can actually go and search for the actual search terms, almost like an elastic search, custom events, requests, get the JSON back for it. So if we go back into discard, if we go back into our little portal here, and we're going to distribute tracing, you'll see here that there's a search option here, and it gives you the option to actually use, click here to see all the data, or you can use the syntax, so we can go search, and you can get all the event types for the last 24 hours. You can see here that I had a request, 99 requests, dependency searches there, exception, and I can get every request. I can even click through here, end-to-end transaction details, hello world get, I can get the request, how long it took, the related items, I can view all the telemetry. Yeah, this is exactly what I want, because this is taking away all of the guesswork around managing the application lifecycle of a microservice. Now I can run this. Also, remember, this could be just a little hello world application, or alternatively, it could be a Spring app application, but they all use Spring and Java on the underlying, and they're just basic Java apps, actually. And that's everything I wanted to show you on Spring App. Also, if you want to get started, we're going to do the go into DevOps now. You can go aka.ms/get Azure Spring Cloud. You can also check out the documentation, aka.ms Azure Spring Cloud docs. And then we have a full workshop here that takes everything that I did right now. You can do in a workshop-based system, aka.ms Azure Spring Cloud workshop. It also gives you the opportunity to use Kubernetes on Spring, and also the distributed tracing and demos that I showed you right now. So that's get Azure Spring Cloud, Azure Spring Cloud docs, and Azure Spring Cloud workshop. So let's go back to our little Azure demo there. So the DevOps demo, and you'll see here that I've got my DevOps project that should have been created. So let's go back here, and I want to go DevOps starter. I've got my Spring Boot starter here. And I get my full CI/CD pipeline, which I can actually plug into the Maven of that. And I've got my builds. And also, wow, it failed. Let's see what the failure is. I'm very curious about that. Let's go into the failure. And you'll see here that with Azure DevOps, we actually run a Linux tier with a pipeline. Let's go here, failed. Okay, so I actually tried to do premium on I think that my account is a little bit overutilized. So I should have actually gone down one, but the pricing team didn't actually allow me to do that. And I've got my pipelines and my releases, and I can actually create my Spring-based release pipeline if I wanted to here. I've got dev, and I can edit that, edit pipeline. I want to create a QA and staging pipeline, and I can do here. Let's go clone. I can do here. Let's go, we'll call that production. You can add quickly. We'll just do save there. And in production, I want to make sure that that is only run on after stage pre-deployment approvals. And if I run this again, I have to get actually Rory Preddy, which is I'm part of the DevOps organization, to approve it to actually execute this in production. I also want to make sure that this on here uses the same, let's just close that, the same deployment slot. Remember, application servers get deployment slots. So you can actually go into view the stages here, deploy app services, and I can just specify a new deployment slot if I wanted to here, create app services here. I can create one, an app, a deployment slot here, deploy to slot or deployment slot environments and production. So I can save that. And then I can also go back into my pipelines and create a QA one. So it's pretty easy to create Spring Boot starters from there, from the Azure DevOps, and then also create it and deploy it via Azure DevOps, and also use this to drive your Spring Cloud DevOps processes. That's everything I wanted to show you today. So we've covered quite a lot. So just in summary a little bit. So I've covered a little bit around Java at Microsoft, why we heavily invested there, what is a microservices, and you saw there the distributed tracing, the management, the authorization, and gateway. All of those are components of microservices. How you can use a Spring framework on Azure. We saw how to use with DevOps, and also how you can use Azure Spring on a DevOps pipeline. And then we looked at Azure Spring Cloud and what actually Azure Spring Cloud brings to the table. So it's pretty impressive. And you get 32 gigabytes of memory, 16 CPUs for $1 an hour. Okay, so let's look at some questions, and we can do some more demos if you want, and also answer some of the questions. So let's see here. We've got some published questions. Will the slides be available? Yes, they will. And not only will they be available, but you can actually get most of the material that I gave you on Microsoft Docs. If I go here, Spring Cloud, Azure, we have an entire portal, Azure Spring Cloud, that goes through a lot of the details here. You'll see there that it goes through the features and the pricing also. If you want to see the pricing here, well, okay, that was demo. That worked before. Let's try that again. See pricing. Yeah, okay, it worked this time. You can see you can look at the currency. So for dollar-wise, let's go for US dollar. It's about $1 an hour, and you get 32 CPUs for that. We also have documentation. So let's go back to the documentation, and a lot of tutorials around this. So Azure documentation, Microsoft Learn. So we can go to the cloud documentation, MS Docs. So Spring Cloud documentation, what is the overview, getting started, configure your services, how to guide, automate with CI/CD, monitor your application, distributed tracing, diagnostic services, bind with other services, with Cosmo, with MySQL, with Redis Cache, Azure monitor metrics, and then the actual API reference. So you can actually go in all the way down to the microservices, what you actually see for the REST services. And that's really what microservices is. You can manage them all the way down to the API services of the individual Spring Cloud there if you want to do it. If you don't want to use the portal, you can create your own dashboard and your own portal to actually manage all of those services yourself. Great. I think that's all the questions that we had. If you want to reach me, you can reach me on at Rory Preddy on my Twitter account. You can also reach the Reactor on the Reactor Twitter account, so at Rory Preddy. And I look forward to seeing you soon on the 27th. I think it's the 27th. Yeah, 27th. I have a really good talk on accessibility. So how to program in accessibility using Microsoft tooling, and to empower everyone to achieve more. And I just want to thank Hassan and the Reactor, Microsoft Reactor, to host me, and I look forward to seeing you in future sessions, and thank you very much for attending the session.
Thank you, Rory, for this amazing session. I also shared the link to the session, the upcoming session, the accessibility one, on the Q&A for everyone to join us again there. All right. With all of that, we'll see you next time. And thank you again for your time. It was an amazing session, and we look forward to the accessibility session on the 27th. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.